Hi, I'm Sid Henderson. I'm a leisure class instructor here at Tucson Parks and Recreation at the Randolph Rec Center. And today I wanted to show you guys how to make a borosilicate glass eye. Now I mainly use these in my sculptural work. Here's one right here. And I also do glass in order to make more realistic eyes. So the difference between borosilicate glass and soft glass is it melts at a lot higher temperature and it's a lot more thick and viscous. It's almost like working with hot glue gun glue. I've got didinium glasses on to protect my eyes from the soda flare, which is the bright, fiery light that comes off of this torch here. And I also have graphite marvers. This one's for making round marble shapes. So we're going to use this to sculpt the front of the eye. And this is a lentil maker. We use this for sculpting the lens on the back of the eye. I also have some tweezers. These are extremely handy when manipulating hot glass because you don't want to touch it with your fingers, obviously. I also have a hooked pair of pliers. I use this a lot too. You'll see why later, but it's also for gripping the glass. And finally, a tungsten pick. This won't melt under the heat of the fire, and it'll allow me to like poke and prod the glass and shape things around if I need to. All right, so when you light a torch, the best way to do it is to remember the word poop. Poop stands for propane, oxygen, and that's when you turn it on, and then oxygen, propane, and that's when you turn it off. So you always want to turn on the propane first and the oxygen second. So I'm going to turn on the propane. There we go. And then turn on the oxygen. And this deep reducing flame, which is this red stuff here, it's going to slowly brighten and then turn into a straight, solid blue flame. So first thing I did before I got started was I washed all my glass off. This will actually improve the clarity and reduce the chances of bubbles forming in the glass. And what I want to do is I'm going to start on the tip of the fire and just sort of move it around a bit to heat it up kind of gently because this is a thicker piece of glass. Unlike soft glass, boro glass can be heated really fast and it won't shatter unless it's really thick. So I usually start out with a thicker piece of glass out here and move in closer. In spite of this hot, dangerous fire, it's pointed away from me, so it's really safe. And as long as you keep like your glass and stuff on the other side of the torch, you won't risk dropping anything molten on your lap. But I still have a suede apron just to be safe. So now that I've preheated it a bit, I'm going to start to pull it closer to the fire. And the tip is going to start to glow a faint orange color that'll slowly get brighter. So that means that it's melting. And the first thing I'm going to do is form the sclera, or the white part of the eye. So I'm going to gather a bead at the end. Gathering is this term you use to make kind of like a thick glob of glass at the end of your glass rod. You can give it a little bit more heat now that it's glowing. But I kind of want to keep the flame blue. So I'm going to adjust both the oxygen and the propane accordingly so it stays blue. So now that I've got like a nice hot glob at the end, what I'm going to do is just gently touch it to my graphite marber and roll it around while I'm pushing down on it. And that's going to sharpen it into this cone shape. I'm going to cut back on the heat quite a bit now. And next thing I'm going to do is add the sclera. Now, borosilicate glass is a little more pricey than soft glass. So you always want to use as much clear as possible. So notice I'm not making this out of a solid piece of white glass. I'm making a clear core and then adding white on top. So now I'm going to gently heat the tip of the white up. This one tends to bubble if you heat it too quickly, so you want to heat it a little bit slower. Heat it up nice and good. And then when I got a nice glowing tip on it, I'm going to push from the top and just drag it straight down like that. Makes a nice little white stripe there. I'm going to continue this all the way around. I'm going to leave a clear spot on the very tip. That's basically our target for when we make the sclera, when we make the iris and pupil, and want to put it into the exact middle of it. And you can do this just with one type of white, but I like to alternate between a white called star white, which is pure white, and another white called white sand, which is an off-white color. It kind of creates a really subtle swirling effect in the sclera that you can see. These aren't hyper-realistic per se. They're stylized, but they're still pretty realistic looking. But obviously, no living person is going to have like a vortex colored iris. So that one's done. I'm going to just put it aside to cool gently. And I'm going to rotate this around the fire just to heat everything back up again and make sure it stays nice and warm. And just, when I start to see the white start to turn a little bit pink-orange under the fact that it's, getting heat again, I'll know it's good. All right, now I'm going to take my sand white, which is the off-white colored white, sort of a warm color. I'm going to gently heat that up. And I'm just basically going to fill in the gaps that I left. Okay, good. All right, so I put down all the white on top of the clear and made it opaque. So now I'm just going to rotate it in front of this gentle fire and heat it back up again. So we don't want to heat up the white too quickly or it'll bubble. And what I'm looking for this fire here is sort of a bright blue fire where it's blue, it's a little fuzzy. If it were clearer, that would be too much oxygen. So I want something that's a little bit more neutral, meaning it's not reducing at all, but it's still oxidizing, but it's not oxidizing that hard. And this sort of softer fire will heat this thing that I have at the end more evenly and effectively. So the hotter I make this, the further out I hold it so that it doesn't get such a harsh heat. If I held it right next to the tips of the fire, then it would be too hot and the white would bubble. So at this point, you're going to see like the white is smoothing out now. It's no longer got like a fresh texture on it. And the whole thing is going to be glowing orange. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, I'm going to push it against the graphite block here, and I'm going to rotate it. So you kind of like want to imagine this action to be like squealing tires on a road, like the tires are grinding against the road and they're not moving in any direction. And this will create a vortex effect, which is where these stripes will start to stretch and swirl. And you kind of do this a couple of, this doesn't happen in one pass. You want to do it in a couple of passes. So I'm heating it back up. Then I'm putting it on the graphite pad. Twisting it. And if you look at if you see the glowing parts on it here, you can see they're starting to twist. So I'm going to heat it up again. Give it another twist. And I don't know if this is standard with all glass artists, but I've taken to sort of starting on the fatter part of the cone and pushing on that first, and then rolling the cone until it gets to the tip. I'm going to roll it higher up on the torch marver, this part right here, to sort of correct like an irregularity in it, or see if I can. But if there is, it's no big deal, because you're basically going to melt the back side of this into the lens on the back. Alright, next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to gather this back into a round, I'm going to melt this back into a big glob, just like we did right before we turned this into a cone. So that's going to melt this guy into the general shape of an eyeball. And now what I want to do is I want to slowly cool this down. And the reason we want to do that is we're kind of partially annealing the glass. Annealing is when you sort of so when you melt glass, it jostles it up really good. Like the atoms in the glass, really good. And they get excited and they're bouncing around and stuff, and you're molding them around and shaping them so they're kind of shocked. So if you cool this too quickly, the glass could shatter. So by cooling it slowly, we're doing something called annealing, which allows the molecules of glass to sort of settle down and form and set themselves back up again. And it's not that hard to do. You basically just hold it on the tip of your fire like this, further out, and watch the glow start to like fade slowly. Once it kind of cools back down to more of a non-glowing state, then it's annealed and you can set it aside. All right, so I'm going to pop this in the kiln, and the kiln will keep it warm so we don't have to worry about it shattering on the way down. Now I'm going to take a thinner glass rod and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to heat it up gently, and I can heat this one up a little more quickly because it's smaller. Once I see the tip glowing, I can just gently shape it into a new cone. And it's important to try to get this one as perfect and round as possible, just because this one's going to be the iris. We want the iris to be nice and perfect and round. So it's going to look like this. This should be good. So first thing we're going to do, and then now we're going to cool down the fire. And I've got some silver glass we can play with here. Silver glass is nice because it makes streaks in them, and so it resembles sort of like the streaks in your iris. So first thing, I'm going to make like a hazel eye. So the first thing I'm going to do is apply. I'm going to apply the blue first. And really, you can use whatever kind of glass you want. So now that I've got that laid down, I'm going to put a little bit of Silver Creek, which is a creamy silver colored glass, right near the middle, right where the pupil goes. There we go. And I'll finish up with a little bit of sparkling green silver glass, and I'll fill in the areas in between the blue with this one. All right, that's all done. Now I'm going to heat that up. And the interesting thing about silver glass is that it does something called striking. So what happens is you apply it and it's one color, but when you cover it in clear, it does this really beautiful opalescent sort of milky effect. And that kind of makes it look like that'll make it look like an iris. So that's why I'm using that. This could actually be where a tungsten pick comes in handy, because I want to make sure this is perfectly round. So what I can do is heat it up really nice and hot, and then just drag this across the tip. Oh, I need to heat this up a little bit. All right, so I'm pulling a little bit of it down, just gently, very, very gently, just to even the boundary out. Okay, there we go. And now that I've heated it up nice and good, we'll do the vortex thing again. And we're going to keep looking at the streak lines in our glass while we're doing this to keep track of how things look. All right, so now I'll have this really nice band of twisted silver glass, or like around sort of like the middle of the cone, basically, with a clear glob on the silver tip. And the way you fix that is you're going to heat just the tip up. You're going to take a pair of tweezers and get them ready. Grab the silver, you just grab the clear tip and then pull it away and twist it while you're pulling. And pull some more color down to the tip. Pull some more color down to the tip and swirl it around at the very end. But we also want to add a pupil. So now that I've got the tip finished, I'm going to protect it with a little glob of black glass. And the nice thing about doing eyes this way is you know exactly where where to put the pupil, because you just have to land it right on the tip. So I'm going to heat this, just heat a little glob of glass up at the end of this jet black rod, and push it and give it a little swirl, like that. So you got a little black dot on the tip right there. I'm going to melt that tip into the glass. There we go. So now it's this perfect little bead at the end. To vortex it a little bit more until it evens out. All right, so now the iris and the pupil are done. Make sure that when you do this part, though, you don't want like a long, narrow cone, because otherwise you won't be able to see the iris. You want more of a short, wide cone. All right, so now that that's ready, I'm going to retrieve my sclera glass, and I'm going to activate the major torch. Now, I've been keeping them annealed. Still want to be very careful, because this is a large piece of glass that you've already worked on. So what you want to do is get rid of any sparks coming out of your torch, and then keep this on a low, gentle flame. See how it's kind of fluffy out here? And that will help you reheat the sclera way out here without shattering it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to keep rotating it while it's far out. And I'm also going to hold the iris and pupil out here. And I want this to stay hot so it'll adhere to the sclera. And I also want to make sure it doesn't shatter or anything like that. but I also don't want it to be molten because that'll ruin the eye. So you want to keep that out here so it's hot, but you don't want it to be glowing. You just want it to be hot. But you do want the sclera to be really molten so that it's soft, so you can really jam the iris and pupil in there really good. So now that I've started to see some red on the glass, it's safe for me to turn it up a little bit. I'm keeping the silver glass way far out. I'm keeping the sclera not next to the burner ports, still in a pretty hot spot. I'm going to start to tilt this back so that it gathers. Remember what gathering means? It means that the glass is forming a larger and larger bead on the tip of the rod. And as you can see, there's a nice clear spot in the middle. That's going to be our target for the iris and pupil. We want to jam the iris and pupil right in the middle of that clear spot. Now that it's in there, what I want to do is I want to get rid of the rest of this glass rod that the iris and pupil is attached to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to heat up the rod just where, just where it's stuck, so that melts off. If I yank on it a little bit, there we go, it'll start to come off. So we want to take off a good amount of glass, but not too much, just enough to get rid of most of the clear. And we can take off just a little bit more. We're trying to make it so that the lens isn't too big, because this clear glass on the end is actually going to be the lens of your eye. So now that I've got this, it's very important that you don't touch any of that. You want it to be pulled off onto a point, but you don't want to touch anywhere where it's close to the sclera. And what we're going to do is something called a dot stack. It's a very big dot stack, basically. And all we're going to do is heat it up gently and keep rotating it. And if you don't touch any of that at all, it'll melt into a perfectly round lens shape. So now that it's nice and hot, I can actually take the marble maker, this guy right here, and I can allow this to cool down. So if you use these guys, what I've tended to notice is that if you just take it hot right off the thing and smash it in there, the surface of the glass will still be too molten, and you'll get scuff marks and imperfections and chill marks on your piece. So what I like to do to make this sculpt round is I'm going to blow on the surface of the marble, and that'll freeze the very surface of it while leaving the interior molten. So I'm going to put that right there. And now I can sort of like starting a campfire at Boy Scouts or something. You just rub it back and forth like this, and that polishes it into a nice round shape. And what you want to do is you're just rotating it around in the marver, going back and forth, and that rounds it out really nicely. Heat it up gently at the tip here, and what this is going to do is just this is called flame polishing it. It's getting rid of any sort of shiver marks or imperfections in the glass. It's just sort of melting just the very surface of the glass until it's nice and smooth. I'm going to switch back to the miner. Remember now, poop, protein, oxygen, and then to turn this off, oxygen, propane, just like that. You don't get any loud explosions or anything like that. All right, so this thinner glass rod is called a punty, and what this is it lets us grab onto the glass without using our hands, because we can't use our hands. And so the trick to doing a punty is you want to do something called a cold seal. So So you're going to heat it up until it's a glowing piece of glass, just at the very tip. And then this is going to be warm but not glowing, this side. That's the important thing. It has to be warm, but it can't be molten. You have two choices here. You could make it a perfectly round glass eye, or you could save a little bit of money on glass and do a lens on the back instead. And not only is it less expensive, I've also tended to notice that if you install it so that you can only see the front of the eye, the lens will actually help channel light from the back of the eye into the pupil and iris, and it'll look more alive or more, I don't know, just more interesting. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to make this into a lens instead. And this also will increase the size of the eye as well. So right now it's kind of small. I'm just going to push it just like that. And that makes the lens. We're going to blow on it again. That'll prevent chill marks from appearing. So, and we're going to do the campfire maneuver. Just call it that for lack of a better word. And then here's the tricky part. You want to undo the punties completely. So you're going to take a rod of glass, knock the punty off, just like that. And now you have a scar on the back from the last punty. So the way you fix that is you're going to put the flame into a very oxidized state. That way I'll have a little bit more space between the torch and the... So basically this is just melting the very surface of the glass to polish off that punty scar. And if you're worried that the marble will fall out of the marver, you just take your tool and hold on to it so that it doesn't fall out. I like to just every once in a while I like to rotate it a little bit so that, because the glass is going to move, a little bit with gravity and a little bit towards the hottest part of the fire. So if you keep rotating it and heating it from different angles, it'll fix that. You won't have like a lopsided lump of glass. And it's basically done when you tilt the glass, let the background lighting in your studio glint off the surface of the glass, and it just, behaves like a nice, smooth, consistent lens. That's it. It's done.